Hi, I'm Frank Gaffney, the president of the Center for Security Policy, and I'm here to present what you might think of as a virtual press conference featuring a number of the most knowledgeable and certainly the most informed individuals addressing a very important public policy issue. Specifically, should Thomas Perez become the next Secretary of Labor? Mr. Perez is currently the Assistant Attorney General of the United States for Civil Rights, and in that capacity and in his previous career, he has engaged in a series of actions and decisions and policy initiatives that are deeply problematic. These individuals, whom I'm very proud to present, believe that they should, in fact, taken together, disqualify Mr. Perez from consideration for the Secretary of Labor position, or for that matter, any other position in the United States government.
My name is Chris Farrell. I'm the Director of Investigations and Research for Judicial Watch. And Judicial Watch, for some time, has examined the professional conduct and activities of Department of Labor Secretary nominee Thomas Perez, particularly with respect to his job as the Chief of the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. In his time as the Chief of the Civil Rights Division, Thomas Perez has advanced a rather militant, hard left agenda that is focused very often on racialist ideas or concepts and implementation of plans and policies within the Department of Justice. Along those lines, he's an unabashed liberal, and that's fine. People can have different philosophical ideas and political beliefs, but when they're acted upon, when they're implemented in a way that either ignores or violates the law, that's where folks run into trouble. So when it comes to Mr. Perez and his track record, whether it's the Voting Rights Division within the Justice Department, his pressure and influence there, whether it's his contacts and communications and actions in the Twin Cities of Minnesota with a disparate impact litigation case that was withdrawn from the Supreme Court docket, and what his role and activities were there. There are just an awful lot of questions. Tom Perez has a very sharp mind. He's a bright, articulate guy with a tremendous track record, but it is a very pointed, very singular, very hard left militant track record that does not necessarily reflect the views and interests of all the people. He certainly represents a segment, and he has a very strong way of advocating those issues that he believes most in. But it may not be the best and most thoughtful and most considerate interests for all the people of the United States. And that's where his hard militant agenda runs into trouble. So we've conducted investigations related to his work at the Department of Justice, his activities, the programs that he's advanced, and we've made very aggressive use of the Freedom of Information Act to uncover records and documentation detailing his behavior and his activities. All those records, all that information is always posted on our website because we believe that the documents speak for themselves. Whether you agree or disagree with a particular political philosophy or point of view is one thing, but when you read the actual records and documents themselves, it really illuminates or brings to light the importance of somebody like Mr. Perez, and whether when he moves from being an Assistant Attorney General to being a Secretary of a department, particularly the Labor Department, with all the impacts and consequences that may come out of that, particularly with regard to immigration reform and how that manifests itself. So it's important that a very keen eye is cast, or view is cast, of Mr. Perez and his work, because we have to remember that it's not just advancing one particular slice or segment of the public's interest, it's the entire public, all the people of the United States, not just a select personal few that certain leaders wish to advance over others.
My name is Anita Moncrief. I'm a writer, a blogger, activist, and a mom. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and I'm a former employee of Acorn and a former liberal. I came to know about Perez during my time at Acorn, and I was very shocked about some of the things I found out, including the fact of his connections between Acorn, Casa de Maryland, and Perez. I don't think many people realize what Casa de Maryland is. It's an organization that works with illegal immigrants here in Maryland. They work out of a mansion in Langley Park, Maryland. So while many of those people in the communities that I live in are suffering and we're experiencing budget cuts and, more or less police force, they gave $28 million to this group in order for it to function, and basically as an illegal day labor camp. Perez was also involved with that and involved with Acorn through Casa de Maryland. Another thing that people should realize is that one of the things that I've learned in the communities is that blacks are sometimes used as a commodity during election season. And the DOJ selectively enforced key provisions of the National Voter Registration Act in order to keep blacks in a state of current and constant victimization, to where they always felt like they were being disenfranchised and held down by so-called voter suppression and voter intimidation. When in all actuality, by only enforcing one provision of the NVRA and not going and looking at the fact that the lists have not been maintained, have not been cleaned in years, and are full of dead, ineligible, and sometimes non-citizen voters, you're actually disenfranchising more blacks and minorities than any type of fake suppression efforts have ever done. But Perez was actively part of keeping that meme going and keeping the fact that blacks have to be victims and have to be held down, and that created more instances of supposed or fake racism than anything else. So I think that Perez has done more damage to the black community and has done more damage to the voting rights than any other person in the DOJ. And now that Perez is being nominated as Secretary of Labor, those same failed policies that have followed him most of his career will now be in place at the Department of Labor. And that will affect minority communities across the country, because what we have seen from these policies is that they are creating a permanent underclass in our society, a class that lives off of handouts and subsidies and other kickbacks that are coming out of this administration. And who does that hurt? That hurts the people that are going to work every day, that are doing it the right way, that are paying their taxes and working for the American dream, and they're finding that American dream is just out of reach because of these policies. Effectively, the Department of Labor will put the American dream on life support, and that's all going to be under Perez's watch, which is why we must fight his nomination and make sure that we put someone in that's going to not follow the trail of failed policies, but implement new ones.
Hi, I'm Hans von Spakowski, Senior Legal Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, and we're here to talk about Thomas Perez, who is the current head of the Civil Rights Division and has been nominated for the Department of Labor. About a month ago, in March, the Inspector General of the Department of Justice released a devastating report about the mismanagement of the Civil Rights Division. And one of the most serious allegations in there that should be of great concern to the American public is the fact that Mr. Perez does not believe in equal protection under our federal discrimination laws. He told the Inspector General that he did not believe that part of the Voting Rights Act, Section 5, he does not believe it protects white voters from discrimination. I think it is just simply shocking that a law enforcement official at the Department of Justice does not believe in the race-neutral enforcement of the Voting Rights Act, which was intended to protect all Americans from discrimination, no matter what their race. There are many other problems with that division and the way it's been run during this administration, by the way, including the harassment and intimidation of career employees within the division who are perceived by other employees as being conservative or Republicans. Individuals who have engaged in that kind of behavior have not been disciplined or terminated by the department. In fact, one employee is listed in the IG report who engaged in such behavior. She actually committed perjury and lied to the Inspector General when first confronted about this, and then later admitted that in fact she had lied. There are many other problems, including the abuse of the powers of the Justice Department, the filing of meritless cases that the department has lost and has resulted in large awards of attorney's fees and costs against the division, which are paid for by the American taxpayer. So there are many issues like that, all of which are things that we should be concerned about over the Department of Justice and how it is run.
My name is Rosemary Jenks. I'm the Director of Government Relations for Numbers USA. We're an immigration organization, so we are very much concerned about the nomination of Thomas Perez as the Labor Secretary. This is a man who has spent his career essentially fighting for illegal aliens to be employed and compete with unemployed Americans. We have about 20 million American workers who don't have full-time work right now and want it, and we do not believe that the Secretary of Labor should be someone who is clearly and demonstrably more concerned with making sure that illegal aliens have jobs than with making sure that American workers have jobs. When Thomas Perez was at Casa de Maryland, his goal was to ensure that illegal aliens could unlawfully find employment in the United States and take jobs away from American workers. With unemployment the way at levels it is now, and with historic low labor force participation in this country, we need to have a Secretary of Labor who is going to be more concerned about American workers than about illegal aliens. We cannot afford to have someone who has spent his career essentially setting up day labor sites and so on for illegal aliens and helping them avoid prosecution for being in the country illegally. It's not fair to American workers. It's not the right position for him to be in. The Secretary of Labor clearly should be someone concerned with ensuring that Americans have jobs and are productive members of our society.
My name's Christian Adams. I was a voting section attorney at the U.S. Department of Justice. I am currently in private practice, legal editor at PJ Media. Tom Perez is the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. His record at the Justice Department, I believe, makes him unqualified to be the Secretary of Labor. For example, he's used his position at the Department of Justice to wage a campaign against peaceful pro-life protesters in a series of federal lawsuits which were later found to have no merit. He brought cases in Florida, for example, against a woman named Mary Sue Price. The federal court in Florida said there's no evidence that this woman violated any federal law, threw the case out, and assessed Tom Perez's Justice Department costs and attorney's fees. This abusive prosecution of people exercising their free exercise of speech and religion should not come as much of a surprise if you've been paying a lot of attention, because he was also involved in a case called Hosanna Tabor, where the Justice Department argued that churches have no right to require certain religious behavior or worldviews of their employees. When Perez argued in a brief that the church has no power, no right under the First Amendment to impose church doctrine throughout the church. It was such a radical position that all 9 members of the Supreme Court rejected it, and Perez lost that case. So you see a series of abusive exercises of power against people of faith from this Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. He was also involved in the Department of Justice's spin in the new Black Panther case, claiming, for example, that nobody in the political ranks were involved in dismissing the voter intimidation lawsuit in Philadelphia. The Inspector General report, which was recently released from the Justice Department, demonstrates that is false, that it was not true, and that Perez should have done a better job to figure out what the truth was. But more importantly, perhaps, the most disturbing part of Perez's history of giving inaccurate testimony was his testimony to Congress and the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights that there is no problem within this Justice Department about people unwilling to enforce the law, like in the new Black Panther case, when the victims are white and the defendants are black. Of course, since I worked at the Justice Department, and anybody who has worked in the Civil Rights Division knows that that's the case. Yet Perez denied it repeatedly under oath. He said there's no one of that ilk at the Justice Department. The problem for Tom Perez is I and other attorneys at the Justice Department told him the day before his testimony that there were people of that ilk at the Justice Department who didn't believe that the civil rights laws protect white victims. And you can see these ideas in practice, whether it's the dismissal of the new Black Panther case, the refusal to do anything about the violent mobs, for example, at the Wisconsin State Fair that engaged in racially motivated beatings. You can see this Justice Department is willing to protect some people, but seemingly not willing to protect all people.
Finally, let me say a few words about one other aspect of Thomas Perez's very, very problematic conduct and policy judgment. In some ways, you could say he has exemplified, and he certainly has been a terrifically influential enabler of President Obama's policy towards Islamism. Islamism, of course, is the practice not simply of the Muslim faith, but the practice of seeking to impose it, and the doctrine that is known as Sharia, which codifies its political ambitions to rule the whole world, including, of course, the United States of America. Thomas Perez, throughout his period in the Department of Justice, has used his office to embrace, to legitimate, to empower those associated with, notably, the Muslim Brotherhood in various front organizations, making them effectively the arbiter of American policy towards Muslims in general and towards their agenda in the United States. The effect of this practice is hard to overstate in terms of its insidiousness. Thomas Perez, for one example, has been an active promoter of an individual by the name of Muhammad Majid, a prominent figure in the Muslim Brotherhood. In fact, he runs its largest front in the United States, the Islamic Society of North America. He's also an imam in the Adams Center outside Washington, D.C. Mr. Majid has been very, very active, thanks in no small measure to the access that he has been given by Thomas Perez and others inside the administration in shaping American policy in ways that have contributed materially to its alignment increasingly with the desires, with the demands of the Muslim Brotherhood, to the great detriment of American constitutional rights and, I believe, public policy. Where we are going if a man like Thomas Perez is not only not sanctioned for such conduct, but rewarded for it by being promoted to a cabinet rank position in the Department of Labor, in which he would almost certainly be continuing and intensifying his effort to legitimate, empower, embrace, and otherwise advance the Islamists and their efforts, in the words of the Muslim Brotherhood, to destroy us from within by our hands, should be, especially on top of all of the other very powerful arguments made against this nomination by my colleagues, the ultimate reason why Thomas Perez should not be allowed to become the next Secretary of Labor. I hope you found this information useful and that you will share it with others, particularly those who represent you in the United States Senate, as this nomination reaches the moment of truth in the Senate's deliberations. Thank you for listening.